The rain hammered against the barracks windows with relentless fury, each drop a reminder of the storm that had been brewing not just in the sky, but in the very soul of Lieutenant Sarah Chen. For 18 months, she had endured what others called the impossible, a training regimen designed to break the strongest minds and bodies, to separate those who merely wished to serve from those who were born to lead. The military's most elite special operations program had claimed casualties not in blood, but in spirit, watching promising soldiers walk away with their heads bowed and their dreams shattered. Sarah stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness, her uniform soaked through but her spine straight as steel. Around her, the remnants of what had once been a class of 37 recruits now numbered just 8. The others had found their breaking points, some during the 72-hour survival exercises in hostile terrain, others during the psychological warfare simulations that pushed minds beyond their perceived limits. Each departure had been a lesson in human frailty, each resignation a reminder that strength was not merely about physical endurance but about something far more elusive and precious. Colonel Marcus Reeves observed from the shadows of the training ground, his weathered face betraying nothing of the turmoil within his chest. In 30 years of military service, he had trained thousands of soldiers, watched hundreds attempt to reach the pinnacle of special operations readiness. He had seen men twice Sarah's size crumble under pressure that she absorbed like morning dew. There was something different about her, something that defied his understanding of human limitation and challenged every assumption he had built about strength and resilience. The morning's exercise was designed as the final crucible. Intelligence had reached them about a hostage situation in a mock urban environment, complete with civilians, hostile combatants, and time pressure that would test every skill they had developed. Sarah's team would have 6 hours to infiltrate, assess, plan, and execute a rescue operation while being observed by senior military officials who would determine their fitness for active deployment. As the exercise commenced, Sarah felt the familiar surge of focus that had carried her through countless trials. Her weak self, the frightened girl from a small farming town who had joined the military to prove something to a world that had always underestimated her, had died months ago through a process so gradual and thorough that she sometimes forgot she had ever been anyone else. The transformation had not been comfortable, it had required her to shed layers of self-doubt, cultural conditioning, and fear that had accumulated over 24 years of life. The urban environment sprawled before them like a concrete labyrinth, each building a potential threat, each alleyway a tactical decision that could mean success or catastrophic failure. Sarah's team moved with precision born from months of training together, their communication reduced to hand signals and subtle gestures that spoke volumes. Through her scope, she identified 17 potential entry points, calculated wind speed and trajectory for possible sniper support, and formulated 3 separate contingency plans before her feet touched the ground inside the kill zone. Colonel Reeves watched through binoculars from the observation tower, his jaw tightening as he witnessed something that defied conventional military wisdom. Where her male counterparts relied on brute force and overwhelming firepower, Sarah employed a combination of intelligence, patience, and surgical precision that minimized risk while maximizing effectiveness. She moved through the environment like water finding its path down a mountainside, inevitable, adaptive, and impossible to stop. A hostage scenario unfolded with brutal realism. The mock terrorists were played by experienced soldiers instructed to resist with everything short of lethal force. The civilians were actors trained to panic, to complicate decisions, to create the fog of war that turns simple plans into chaotic nightmares. Sarah's team faced technical failures, unexpected resistance, and time pressure that would have broken lesser units. But she had learned something crucial during her transformation: the weak self that seeks comfort and certainty would always find reasons to quit, while the strong self that embraces uncertainty and discomfort would always find reasons to continue. 3 hours into the operation, disaster struck. Her communications specialist took a rubber bullet to the shoulder during a breach operation, effectively removing him from action. Their planned extraction route was compromised when enemy forces flanked their position with greater numbers than intelligence had predicted. The mission timer showed less than 90 minutes remaining, and they still had not located the primary hostage, a high-value target whose successful rescue was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. It was in this moment of crisis that Sarah demonstrated why Colonel Reeves had begun to question everything he thought he knew about leadership and courage. Instead of defaulting to panic or calling for extraction, she implemented a strategy so audacious that it bordered on madness. Using herself as bait, she drew enemy fire while directing her remaining team members to flank positions that would allow them to locate and secure the hostage. The plan required her to maintain perfect positioning under intense simulated fire for 27 minutes, a tactical impossibility that became possible through sheer force of will. The training officers observing the exercise found themselves leaning forward in their seats as Sarah executed maneuvers that seemed to violate the basic principles of self-preservation. She moved with calculated recklessness, drawing fire away from her team while maintaining enough defensive positioning to avoid being eliminated from the exercise. Her communication remained clear and decisive even as rubber bullets whined past her head and flashbang grenades exploded close enough to rattle her teeth. Colonel Reeves felt something shift in his chest as he watched her performance, a recognition that transcended professional appreciation and touched something deeper in his understanding of human potential. This was not merely excellent soldiering, this was a demonstration of what happened when someone completely destroyed their attachment to the weak self that seeks safety and comfort above all else. Sarah had become something rare and powerful, a person who could no longer be destroyed by external circumstances because she had already destroyed everything within herself that was vulnerable to destruction. When the exercise concluded with the successful rescue of all hostages and the neutralization of all threats, the silence in the observation tower was profound. Senior officers who had expected to witness another competent but unremarkable training exercise instead found themselves trying to process something that challenged their understanding of what was possible in military operations. Sarah's performance had been flawless not because nothing had gone wrong, but because she had adapted to everything that went wrong with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural. The debriefing session that followed was unlike any that Colonel Reeves had ever conducted. The statistics spoke for themselves: mission completion time that was 40 minutes faster than the previous record, 0 civilian casualties, minimal ammunition expenditure, and tactical innovation that would likely be studied and incorporated into future training protocols. But the numbers failed to capture the essence of what they had witnessed: a human being operating at the absolute peak of their potential because they had removed all internal obstacles to peak performance. Sarah stood before the panel of senior officers, her uniform still bearing the marks of combat, her face calm with the kind of peace that comes only from knowing you have given everything you had to give. When asked to explain her tactical decisions, she spoke with quiet precision about probability calculations, risk assessment, and the importance of remaining psychologically flexible under pressure. But Colonel Reeves heard something deeper in her words, the voice of someone who had learned that strength comes not from avoiding destruction, but from being willing to be destroyed completely in service of something greater than personal comfort or safety. As the formal evaluation concluded and the other officers departed to write their reports, Colonel Reeves found himself alone with Sarah for the first time since training had begun. He studied her face in the fluorescent light of the briefing room, searching for some sign of the frightened recruit who had arrived 18 months ago. He found nothing. The person standing before him was entirely new, forged through a process of systematic self-destruction that had eliminated every trace of weakness while preserving and enhancing everything that was essential and strong. The conversation that followed would remain with both of them for the rest of their careers. Colonel Reeves had trained elite soldiers for decades, but he had never encountered someone who embodied the principle that destruction of the weak self was the path to indestructible strength. Sarah had not merely survived her training, she had used it as a catalyst for a transformation so complete that she had emerged as something qualitatively different from what she had been. The frightened girl seeking to prove herself had been replaced by a warrior who no longer needed to prove anything because she had moved beyond the realm where proof was necessary. Part 2, the testing of mettle. 6 months after graduation from the Special Operations Program, Sarah found herself deployed to a region where the theoretical became devastatingly real. The mission parameters were classified at the highest levels, but the essential facts were brutal in their simplicity. A terrorist cell had taken control of a humanitarian compound in a war-torn nation, holding 43 aid workers hostage while demanding the release of captured militants and safe passage to friendly territory. The local government lacked the resources for a rescue operation, and the international community was paralyzed by political considerations that valued diplomatic solutions over immediate action. Sarah's unit was tasked with reconnaissance and intelligence gathering in preparation for a larger rescue operation that might never come. The diplomatic channels that were supposed to secure the hostages' release had been active for 11 days with no progress, while intelligence reports indicated that the terrorists were becoming increasingly unstable and violent. Every additional day of delay increased the likelihood that the situation would deteriorate beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. Colonel Reeves had personally selected Sarah for this deployment, though he had not fully explained his reasons to his superiors. Something in her training performance had convinced him that she possessed qualities that might prove essential in a situation that defied conventional military solutions. Her ability to remain psychologically centered under extreme pressure, combined with her innovative tactical thinking, suggested that she might see opportunities where others saw only impossibilities. The forward operating base was located in a compound that had been hastily constructed in the desert, its concrete walls and razor wire providing minimal comfort against the reality that they were surrounded by hostile territory on all sides. Sarah's team consisted of 4 other specialists, each selected for their particular expertise, but she had been designated as team leader despite being junior in rank to 2 of her colleagues. The designation had created some tension, particularly with Sergeant Davies, a veteran with 12 years of experience who had expected to lead the mission. The hostage compound was located 17 miles from their base, situated in a valley that provided natural defensive advantages to anyone controlling the high ground. The terrorists had positioned themselves with tactical sophistication that suggested professional military training, making any conventional assault approach extremely costly in terms of casualties. Satellite reconnaissance showed that they had established overlapping fields of fire, multiple fallback positions, and what appeared to be prepared demolition charges that could bring down the main building where most hostages were believed to be held. Sarah spent her first 3 days in country studying every available piece of intelligence, from satellite imagery to intercepted communications to interviews with local informants. The picture that emerged was grim. The terrorists were well-equipped, highly motivated, and increasingly paranoid about potential rescue attempts. They had already executed 2 hostages as a demonstration of their seriousness, and intelligence intercepts suggested they were preparing to begin killing 1 hostage every 12 hours until their demands were met. The pressure to act was mounting, but every tactical analysis reached the same conclusion: a conventional assault would likely result in massive casualties among both hostages and rescue forces. The terrorists' position was simply too strong, their preparation too thorough, and their willingness to die too absolute for standard military doctrine to offer a viable solution. As the days passed and diplomatic efforts continued to fail, Sarah found herself facing the kind of impossible decision that had no good options, only degrees of catastrophic failure. It was during her 4th night in country that Sarah experienced what she would later describe as a moment of perfect clarity. While reviewing surveillance footage for the 100th time, she noticed a pattern in the terrorists' behavior that previous analysts had missed. The guards responsible for perimeter security changed shifts at intervals that followed religious observance schedules rather than tactical ones, creating brief windows of vulnerability that occurred at predictable times. More importantly, the compound's water supply came from a well located outside the main defensive perimeter, requiring daily maintenance trips that followed a routine the terrorists had maintained since taking control of the facility. The solution that formed in Sarah's mind was so audacious that it defied every principle of risk management and force protection that had been drilled into her during training. Instead of attempting to overcome the terrorists' defensive advantages through superior firepower or elaborate tactical maneuvers, she would eliminate their defensive advantages by making their position untenable through a combination of psychological warfare and surgical strikes designed to create confusion and panic rather than direct confrontation. The plan she presented to Colonel Reeves via encrypted communication was received with initial disbelief and, then, growing appreciation for its innovative approach to an impossible problem. Rather than attempting to breach the compound's defenses, Sarah proposed to make the terrorists abandon their position voluntarily by convincing them that remaining in place would guarantee their destruction. The operation would require precise timing, perfect execution, and a willingness to accept personal risk that bordered on suicidal, but it offered the possibility of rescuing the hostages without the massive casualties that conventional approaches would inevitably produce. Colonel Reeves found himself facing a decision that would define the rest of his career. Military protocol demanded that he wait for authorization from higher command before approving such an unconventional operation, but intelligence reports indicated that the terrorists were preparing for a final ultimatum that would end with the execution of all remaining hostages. The diplomatic solution that his superiors preferred was no closer to reality than it had been 11 days ago, while the tactical situation was deteriorating with each passing hour. The conversation between Sarah and Colonel Reeves that night took place over a secure satellite link, but the technology could not transmit the intensity of emotion that surrounded their exchange. Sarah presented her plan with the calm precision that had become her trademark, walking through each phase of the operation with mathematical clarity while acknowledging the enormous risks involved. But, beneath her professional demeanor, Colonel Reeves could hear something that moved him deeply, the absolute commitment of someone who had moved beyond fear into a realm where the only consideration was what needed to be done. Permission to execute came with conditions that reflected the political sensitivity of the situation. Sarah's team would have one attempt with no backup and no possibility of official support if things went wrong. Success would be quietly celebrated and quickly classified, failure would be publicly disavowed and personally catastrophic for everyone involved. The stakes could not have been higher, and the margin for error could not have been smaller. The operation began 3 hours before dawn with Sarah moving alone through terrain that offered no concealment and no possibility of retreat if her approach was detected. Her teammates had argued against the solo infiltration, but her analysis was irrefutable. The plan required someone to reach the compound's water supply system without triggering the perimeter alarms, and only one person moving with perfect stealth had any chance of success. The 50 pounds of equipment she carried included enough explosives to contaminate the water supply with a non-lethal but debilitating chemical agent, communication devices that would allow her to coordinate with her team, and enough ammunition to fight her way out if stealth failed. The journey to the target took 47 minutes of movement that required her to cross open ground while remaining invisible to sentries who were scanning with night vision equipment and infrared sensors. Sarah moved with the patience of someone who understood that haste was the enemy of precision, pausing for minutes at a time to allow guards to complete their patrol patterns before continuing her approach. Every step was calculated to minimize noise and avoid detection, every pause timed to take advantage of moments when the sentry's attention was focused elsewhere. When she reached the water supply system, Sarah discovered that the intelligence reports had been incomplete in a way that nearly destroyed the entire operation. The well was not simply protected by the perimeter defenses, it was under direct observation from a guard post that had not appeared in any of the reconnaissance imagery. A single terrorist sat less than 30 meters away, armed with automatic weapons and communication equipment that would alert the entire compound if he detected any intrusion. The decision she made in that moment would be studied in military academies for years afterward. Instead of aborting the mission or attempting to neutralize the guard through violence that would certainly trigger a general alarm, Sarah chose to wait. She remained motionless for 6 hours and 14 minutes, lying in a shallow depression that offered minimal concealment while the terrorist maintained his vigil over the water supply. During those hours, she experienced the complete destruction of every instinct that demanded action, every fear that whispered about discovery, every doubt that suggested the mission was impossible. When the guard finally left his position to join morning prayers inside the compound, Sarah had exactly 11 minutes to complete her sabotage of the water supply before he returned. The chemical agent she introduced to the system was designed to produce symptoms that would mimic a biological weapons attack: nausea, disorientation, and fever that would convince the terrorists that they were under assault by an invisible enemy. The psychological impact was intended to be more devastating than the physical effects, creating panic and paranoia that would drive them from their defensive positions. The secondary phase of the operation began 4 hours later when the contaminated water began to take effect. Sarah's teammates, positioned at carefully chosen observation points around the compound, watched as the terrorists' disciplined defensive posture began to deteriorate into confused activity and panicked communications. The symptoms appeared to be random and progressive, affecting some individuals more severely than others, creating the impression that an unknown biological agent was spreading through their ranks with unpredictable lethality. Sarah had positioned herself within the compound's perimeter by this time, having used the confusion created by the chemical agent to penetrate defenses that would have been impregnable under normal circumstances. Her location inside the terrorists' own defensive positions allowed her to amplify their paranoia through carefully placed evidence that suggested the presence of multiple infiltrators. Shell casings placed near guard posts, equipment moved from its original positions, and communication disruptions that appeared to be the result of sabotage rather than technical failures combined to create a psychological assault that was more effective than any conventional military operation. The climax came when the terrorist leader, convinced that his position was compromised and his forces were under attack by biological weapons, made the decision to evacuate the compound. The withdrawal was hasty and poorly coordinated, exactly as Sarah had predicted, creating opportunities for her team to intervene during the confusion. The rescue of the hostages occurred not through a dramatic firefight, but through the systematic exploitation of psychological pressure that had convinced the terrorists that remaining in place meant certain death. Colonel Reeves monitored the operation from the forward operating base, listening to radio communications that told the story of an impossible victory achieved through methods that challenged every assumption about military operations. When Sarah's voice came through the radio reporting mission success with all hostages recovered and minimal casualties, he felt a profound shift in his understanding of what was possible when someone had truly destroyed their weak self and emerged as something that could not be destroyed by external circumstances. Part 3, the recognition of excellence. The aftermath of the hostage rescue operation created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate military success. Within 48 hours, Sarah found herself summoned to Washington for debriefings that would be attended by officials whose names appeared on organizational charts at the highest levels of national security apparatus. The operation she had conceived and executed was being studied not merely as a tactical success, but as a fundamental challenge to conventional wisdom about special operations doctrine and the psychological principles that governed modern warfare. Colonel Reeves accompanied her to Washington, though his own role in the proceedings remained deliberately understated. The political implications of the mission's success were complex. A female soldier had accomplished something that defied established protocols and challenged assumptions about leadership, tactical innovation, and the relationship between individual initiative and institutional authority. The success was undeniable, but it raised questions that made senior officials profoundly uncomfortable about their understanding of military capability and the systems they had built to develop and deploy it. The Pentagon briefing room where Sarah presented her operational analysis was filled with general officers, intelligence officials, and policymakers who had requested detailed explanations of methods that seemed to exist outside established military doctrine. Her presentation was methodical and precise, walking through each phase of the operation with clinical attention to detail while avoiding any appearance of self-promotion or institutional criticism. But the questions that followed revealed the deeper implications of what she had accomplished. The discussion that emerged centered around a fundamental paradox. Sarah's success had been possible precisely because she had ignored established protocols and conventional wisdom in favor of approaches that defied categorization within existing military frameworks. Her psychological warfare tactics, her willingness to accept personal risk that exceeded acceptable parameters, and her innovative use of non-lethal methods to achieve strategic objectives represented a form of military thinking that challenged the institutional structures designed to ensure consistency and predictability in operations. General Morrison, a career officer with 35 years of experience, posed the question that crystallized the dilemma facing military leadership. Lieutenant Chen, your methods were undeniably effective, but they required you to operate outside established doctrine and accept risks that our protocols are specifically designed to prevent. How do we reconcile exceptional individual performance with the institutional requirements of a military organization that must function at scale across multiple theaters and countless operations? Sarah's response would be quoted in military journals and strategic studies for decades afterward. She spoke with the same calm precision that had characterized her operational planning, but her words carried implications that extended beyond military applications into fundamental questions about human potential and organizational design. General Morrison, I believe the answer lies in understanding the difference between strength that comes from following established patterns and strength that comes from transcending those patterns when circumstances demand innovation. The weak self seeks comfort in established procedures, but the strong self recognizes that true security comes from the ability to adapt beyond the constraints of predetermined frameworks. The room fell silent as the implications of her statements settled into the consciousness of leaders who had built their careers on mastery of established systems and procedures. Sarah was not merely reporting on a successful mission, she was articulating a philosophy of human development that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying military training and organizational culture. Her success had been possible because she had moved beyond dependence on external validation and institutional approval into a realm where action was guided by direct perception of what needed to be done. Colonel Reeves watched the faces around the conference table as Sarah continued her explanation of the principles that had guided her tactical decisions. He could see the struggle between professional appreciation for her results and institutional discomfort with methods that could not easily be systematized, replicated, or controlled through standard military channels. Sarah had become living proof that exceptional performance required a kind of personal transformation that institutional structures could facilitate but not mandate or fully comprehend. The conversation that followed explored the broader implications of Sarah's approach for military training and doctrine. Her methods had succeeded precisely because they were not confined to established tactical frameworks, but this flexibility created challenges for an institution that required predictability and standardization across thousands of personnel and countless operations. The question facing military leadership was whether exceptional individual performance could be encouraged without compromising the systematic approaches that ensured competent performance across the broader organization. Dr. Catherine Wells, a psychological consultant who specialized in military performance optimization, raised concerns that reflected the tension between individual excellence and institutional requirements. Lieutenant Chen's psychological profile shows characteristics that are extremely rare in the general population. Her ability to operate effectively under extreme stress while maintaining tactical flexibility appears to result from personality traits and cognitive capabilities that cannot be easily developed through conventional training methods. How do we account for these individual differences when developing training protocols and operational doctrine? Sarah's response demonstrated the depth of her understanding of the transformation she had undergone and its implications for others who might attempt similar development. Dr. Wells, I believe the critical factor is not innate capability but willingness to undergo the psychological destruction that eliminates attachment to comfort, safety, and external validation. Military training provides excellent opportunities for this development, but the individual must choose to use those opportunities for fundamental self-transformation rather than simply acquiring technical skills and tactical knowledge. The discussion continued for hours, exploring questions that had no easy answers about the relationship between individual excellence and institutional effectiveness. Sarah's success had demonstrated that exceptional performance was possible, but it had required approaches that defied standardization and systematization. The military's fundamental challenge was how to encourage the kind of personal transformation that Sarah represented while maintaining the organizational coherence necessary for effective large-scale operations. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking female officer present, posed a question that addressed the broader implications of Sarah's achievement for military culture and gender integration. Lieutenant Chen, your success challenges assumptions not only about tactical doctrine but about the capabilities of female personnel in special operations roles. How do you see your experience influencing policy decisions about gender integration in elite military units? Sarah's answer reflected her understanding that her achievement transcended gender considerations while acknowledging their unavoidable political implications. General Hayes, I believe that true strength transcends all demographic categories because it results from the destruction of the weak self that seeks identity and validation through external characteristics. Gender, like rank or background, can either be a limitation that reinforces weakness or a starting point for transcendence that demonstrates the irrelevance of assumed limitations. My experience suggests that the most important qualification for special operations is not physical characteristics but psychological readiness for the complete transformation that eliminates all attachments to comfort and safety. The briefing concluded with no definitive resolution to the questions that Sarah's success had raised. Military leadership found themselves facing a fundamental paradox. Her methods were too individualistic and unpredictable to become standard doctrine, but too effective to be ignored or dismissed. The institutional challenge was how to encourage the kind of personal development that made exceptional performance possible while maintaining the systematic approaches necessary for large-scale military effectiveness. Colonel Reeves found himself in a unique position as the senior officer who had identified and developed Sarah's potential. During private meetings with Pentagon officials, he was asked repeatedly about his methods for recognizing and cultivating exceptional capability, but his answers consistently frustrated leaders who wanted systematic approaches to what he understood to be fundamentally individual processes of transformation. His experience with Sarah had convinced him that true military excellence required personal qualities that could be encouraged but not manufactured through institutional programs. The awards ceremony that concluded Sarah's Washington visit was attended by senior military officials and policymakers who wanted to demonstrate institutional recognition of her achievement while carefully managing the political implications of her success. The decorations she received were among the highest honors available to personnel of her rank, but the language describing her accomplishments was deliberately understated to avoid raising questions about the methods she had employed or the doctrine she had challenged. Sarah stood at attention as the citations were read, her face showing no emotion beyond professional composure, but Colonel Reeves could see in her eyes the same quality that had first captured his attention during training, the absolute centeredness of someone who had moved beyond the need for external validation into a realm where accomplishment was its own reward. The awards and recognition were acknowledgments of what she had done, but they could not touch or enhance what she had become through the process of destroying her weak self and emerging as something that could not be destroyed by others. The conversation between Sarah and Colonel Reeves that concluded her Washington visit took place in a small coffee shop near Union Station, away from the formal environments where their professional relationship usually operated. For the first time since he had begun training her 3 years earlier, they spoke not as superior and subordinate but as two individuals who had witnessed something extraordinary in human potential and its practical application to challenges that seemed impossible. Colonel Reeves spoke with unusual candor about his own transformation through the experience of training and deploying someone whose capabilities had exceeded his understanding of what was possible. Sarah, I've spent my entire career believing that military excellence came from the systematic application of proven principles and established doctrine. Your success has forced me to recognize that true excellence requires a kind of personal transformation that transcends any system or institution. You've shown me that the strongest individuals are those who have destroyed everything within themselves that can be destroyed by external circumstances. Sarah's response carried the quiet authority of someone who had moved beyond the need to explain or justify their actions to others. Colonel Reeves, I think what we've learned is that strength is not something we acquire through training or experience, but something we discover by removing everything that obscures our essential capability. The military provided an excellent environment for that discovery, but the transformation itself required a willingness to let everything comfortable and familiar be destroyed in service of something greater than personal security. Their conversation continued as Washington's afternoon traffic moved around them, two individuals discussing principles that extended far beyond military applications into fundamental questions about human potential and the conditions necessary for its full expression. The hostage rescue operation had been a dramatic demonstration of what was possible when someone had completely transcended their weak self, but the deeper significance lay in the example it provided for understanding how strength could be developed through the systematic destruction of everything that limited human capability. The document concludes not with a neat resolution but with recognition that Sarah's achievement represented a beginning rather than an end. Her success had demonstrated that human potential extended far beyond conventional limitations when individuals were willing to undergo the complete psychological transformation that destroyed weakness at its source. The military applications were significant, but the broader implications touched every area of human endeavor where excellence required moving beyond comfort, safety, and established patterns of thought and action. Colonel Reeves returned to his training responsibilities with a fundamentally altered understanding of his role and purpose. Sarah's example had shown him that true military education involved facilitating personal transformations that could not be mandated or systematized, only encouraged through the creation of conditions where individuals could choose to destroy their weak selves in favor of strength that could not be destroyed by external circumstances. The institutional challenges were significant, but the potential rewards, for the military and for human development generally, were beyond calculation. Sarah herself moved forward to new assignments and greater responsibilities, carrying within herself the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered that true security came not from avoiding destruction but from being willing to be completely destroyed in service of what was right and necessary. Her weak self, the frightened girl who had joined the military to prove something to others, had been so thoroughly eliminated that she sometimes forgot it had ever existed. In its place stood someone who could face any challenge with perfect equanimity because she had already survived the complete destruction of everything that could be threatened by external circumstances. The principle that had guided her transformation, that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, had been proven not through philosophical argument but through practical demonstration under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Her victory had been complete not because she had overcome external obstacles, but because she had eliminated internal limitations that would have made those obstacles insurmountable. the document of her achievement would be studied and referenced for decades, but its deeper significance lay in the example it provided for anyone willing to undertake the journey from weakness to indestructible strength through the systematic destruction of everything that limited human potential. End of document.